A silent night, deadly night. The story of the haunted carolers. The first body was found with its mouth frozen open mid-song. Detective Sarah Chen would never forget the way the victim's lips had crystallized around that final note. Ice particles glittering on her tongue like she'd swallowed diamonds. The woman's eyes were wide, locked on something no one else could see. And her vocal cords, the coroner would later report, had shattered like glass. That was 3 days before Christmas, in the small town of Pine Haven, Massachusetts. By the time Sarah arrived at the scene, the other carolers had already been questioned and released. They all told the same story. Margaret Flynn had been singing one moment, hitting the high note of a holiday classic, when she simply stopped. Her voice cut out mid-word, her body went rigid, and she collapsed into the snow, dead before she hit the ground. Heart attack. The local police had concluded, too eager to close the case before the holidays. But Sarah knew better. She'd seen enough death to recognize when something was wrong, and everything about this scene screamed wrong. The temperature around Margaret's body was 15 degrees colder than the surrounding area. The snow beneath her had melted in a perfect circle, then refrozen in strange, fractured patterns that looked almost like sheet music. And then there was the recording. One of the carolers had been filming on her phone when it happened. Sarah watched the footage 7 times, each viewing revealing something new. At timestamp 2:34, just as Margaret reached for that high note, something moved in the darkness behind the group. Not a person. The shape was too tall, too fluid, its edges blurring like smoke. At 2:36, Margaret's breath became visible, but it wasn't the normal white vapor of cold air. It was black, thick and oily, pouring from her mouth like liquid shadow. At 2:37, she was dead. Sarah's phone buzzed. Another body, another caroler. James Whitmore had died in his bathroom, his body discovered by his wife when she came home from her shift at the hospital. He was slumped in the bathtub, fully clothed, with water running over him. But here's what made Sarah's blood run cold. James had drowned in 3 inches of water. And according to his wife, he couldn't have been in there for more than 20 minutes. He was terrified. Mrs. Whitmore sobbed in her kitchen while Sarah took notes. After Margaret died, he kept saying he heard singing all the time, even when there was no music playing. He said it was getting louder. Did he say what he heard? Mrs. Whitmore's hands trembled around her coffee mug. He said it was voices, children's voices, singing in harmony, but wrong somehow. The notes were wrong. Sarah felt something cold spider down her spine. Did your husband mention anything unusual about the night Margaret died? Anything he saw? He said. Mrs. Whitmore's voice dropped to a whisper. He said Margaret wasn't alone when she collapsed. He said there was a child standing next to her, a little girl in an old-fashioned dress. But when the lights came on, she was gone. Sarah left the Whitmore house with more questions than answers. Back in her car, she pulled up the caroling group's roster. 7 members, 2 dead, 5 remaining. She needed to find them before. Her phone rang. The dispatcher's voice was shaking. Detective, we have a situation at Pine Haven Elementary. You need to get here now. The school auditorium was chaos. 3 of the remaining carolers, Linda Vasquez, Thomas Green, and Patricia Donnelly, had been attending a holiday concert when something went horribly wrong. According to witnesses, The children on stage had been performing when their voices suddenly synchronized in a way that shouldn't have been possible. Perfect harmony, perfect pitch. But the song they were singing wasn't on the program. It was something else, something old. And the three carolers had started screaming. Sarah found them in the school nurse's office, sedated and babbling. Linda kept clawing at her ears, leaving bloody trails down her neck. Thomas had bitten through his lower lip. Patricia was the only one coherent enough to speak, and what she said made Sarah wish she'd stayed silent. "We opened something," Patricia whispered, her eyes unfocused. "That night, when we were caroling. We were at the old Blackwood property on Mercy Street. Margaret wanted to sing there. She said it would be romantic with all that history. But we shouldn't have. We should never have sung there." "What's at the Blackwood property?" "It burned down, 1952, Christmas Eve." Patricia's fingers dug into Sarah's arm. There was a church choir performing. 32 children. The doors locked from the outside. They all died. But their voices didn't stop. People said they could hear singing for weeks after, coming from the ruins. Sarah felt ice settle in her stomach. What happened to the person who locked the doors? Never found him. But Margaret... Patricia started laughing, a high, brittle sound. "Margaret found something in the ruins. She picked it up. I told her to leave it, but she didn't listen. She never listened." "What did she find?" Patricia's laughter cut off abruptly. Her eyes focused on Sarah with sudden, terrible clarity. A music box, silver with an inscription. She wound it up, and when it played, her voice dropped to barely audible. When it played, we all started singing along. We couldn't help it. The melody was so beautiful, so perfect. But it wasn't a Christmas carol. It was something else. Something that pulled at something deep inside us. And when we finished the song, I swear I heard children laughing in the darkness. Sarah didn't wait for backup. She drove straight to Mercy Street, to the lot where the Blackwood Church had once stood. The ruins had been cleared decades ago, but the foundation remained now, overgrown with dead winter grass and surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence. She found the two remaining carolers there before her, David Park and Emily Santos. They stood at the edge of the foundation, holding hands, their faces turned toward the sky. They were singing. Sarah couldn't move. The melody was beautiful and horrifying, like nothing she'd ever heard. It made her think of frozen lakes and buried secrets, of voices calling from beneath the ice. The notes seemed to bypass her ears entirely, resonating directly in her bones. Then she saw them. Children. Dozens of them standing in the ruins. Their clothes were charred and smoking, their faces pale as death, their mouths open in perfect O's of song. They surrounded David and Emily, their voices weaving with the carolers in an impossible harmony. Sarah's hand went to her gun. But what could she shoot? What could she stop? The music built to a crescendo. David and Emily's voices rose higher, higher, straining toward notes that shouldn't exist. Sarah could see their breath now, black and thick like Margaret's had been. But this time, it didn't dissipate. It swirled around them, forming shapes, forming hands that reached and grasped and pulled. Sarah ran forward, shouting, but the sound was swallowed by the music. She crossed the threshold of the foundation, and the temperature dropped 40 degrees in an instant. The ghost children turned to look at her. Their eyes were hollow, but not empty. Something lived in those depths, something hungry and patient and impossibly old. They had been waiting here for 70 years, their voices trapped in an endless Christmas performance, their deaths unfinished business. But now they had singers again. Now they could complete their song. One of the children stepped forward, a little girl with ribbons in her hair and burns on her face. She held out her hand to Sarah. In her palm was the music box, silver, engraved, beautiful. "Sing with us," the children said in unison, their voices a chorus of the damned. "Join the carol. Make it complete." David collapsed first, his body hitting the frozen ground with a sound like breaking glass. Emily followed seconds later. The music didn't stop. If anything, it grew stronger, their voices joining the ghostly choir even as their physical forms went still. 7 carolers. 7 voices to complete the harmony. 7 deaths to close the circle that had been broken on Christmas Eve, 1952. Sarah understood now. The children hadn't died alone in that fire. They'd been singing when it happened, performing their Christmas concert until the smoke filled their lungs and the flames consumed their flesh. Their song had been interrupted, left unfinished, and for 70 years, they'd been waiting for enough voices to complete what they'd started. The music box began to play on its own, the melody weaving through the ghostly song. Sarah felt her throat constrict, felt something cold and foreign moving through her vocal cords. Her mouth opened. No, no, no. But the word that came out was sung, perfectly pitched, harmonizing with the voices of the dead. She was the 7th. She'd always been meant to be the 7th. They found Detective Sarah Chen 3 days later on Christmas Eve. She was standing in the ruins of the old Blackwood Church foundation, frozen solid, her mouth open mid-song. The coroner couldn't explain how she died, just like he couldn't explain the other 6. But the local children could have told them, if anyone had bothered to ask. They heard it every night now, singing coming from Mercy Street. Perfect harmony, perfect pitch. 7 voices weaving together with 32 others, completing a Christmas carol that had waited 70 years to finish. And on the coldest nights, when the wind blew just right, you could hear something else beneath the music, something that sounded almost like laughter, something that sounded almost like hunger. Because the carol was complete now, its circle closed. But circles don't end, they spiral. The music box was never found. But sometimes, people walking past the old Blackwood lot reported finding small silver objects in the snow. Bells, ornaments, little treasures that glinted in the moonlight. And when they picked them up, when they turned them over in their hands and examined the beautiful engravings, they would feel an irresistible urge to sing just one note. Just one perfect crystalline note. That's all it would take to start the circle again.